Hello there, you're watching Alt 24 News live from Algiers. Coming up next in our World News program. After being fired amid violent protests, the former director of Kazakhstan Domestic Intelligence Service was imprisoned on accusations of high treason. Plus, Murray was declared catastrophe hit today, Saturday. At least 21 people froze to death in cars struck in snow amid a surplus of tourist arrival in Pakistan. Also coming up in our World News program, India recorded more than 141,000 new COVID-19 cases, the largest since the end of May, as the Omicron variation of the coronavirus surpassed the Delta variant in urban areas. The three white men convicted of murdering Ahmadou Arbari were sentenced on Friday life prison, with a judge rejecting any chance of parole for the father and son who armed themselves and initiated the deadly pursuit of the black man in February 2020. Thank you for joining us. First, in our top stories, after being fired amid violent protests, the former director of Kazakhstan Domestic Intelligence Service was imprisoned on accusations of high treason. Karim Masmov, a close associate of Kazakhstan founding president Nursultan Nazarbayev, was arrested on Thursday after the National Security Committee, or the KNB, started an inquiry into charges of high treason. The escalations of riots in Kazakhstan have reached the epicenter of clashes between security forces and the protesters in refusal of price spike. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev announced on a televised speech on local media that he gave orders to security forces to open fire without warnings against what he considered bandits. Ayedi Usama reports.
Kazakhstan unrest is still witnessing disturbances after the deployment of Russian peacekeeping troops to the epicenter of the riots in Almaty, near the main square. According to the Interior Ministry of the country, 60 armed people and 18 security officers were killed, including one who was beheaded during the clashes between protesters and security forces. Interior Ministry also announced that more than 3,000 people have been arrested, and local media said 70 checkpoints had been set up across the country. In a televised address on Friday, Kassym-Jomart Kemelovich Tokayev stated that he had given security forces orders to open fire without warning if there were further disturbances. After he imposed a curfew on Almaty, the country's former capital, where thousands of people had taken to the streets. In addition, he declared a state of emergency, which was later made nationwide. Tokayev also approved the resignation of the government and requested support from the Collective Security Treaty Organization. The president made reference to 20,000 bandits who had attacked the country's largest city of Almaty and vowed to destroy them. Later on, he declared that constitutional order was mainly restored after the unprecedented unrest in recent days. Tokayev thanked Russia's President Vladimir Putin for sending troops and said the peacekeeping force would be in the country on a short-term basis. Russia's defense ministry stated that military units were flying to Kazakhstan round the clock and were in control of the airport in Almaty, which was captured by protesters on Wednesday. According to Kazakh government, the organization's forces have been arriving to the country but have not been involved in the elimination of militants.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken responded to a question comparing the situation in Kazakhstan to the one in Ukraine, border with Russia, saying there are very particular economic and political drivers that make the situations different. However, he warned Kazakhstan government that once Russians are in our house, sometimes it is very difficult to get them to leave.
We very much value the relationship that we have with Kazakhstan. We're watching the situation with real concern. And we are encouraging everyone to find a peaceful resolution and constructive resolution. There are very particular drivers of what's happening in Kazakhstan right now, as I said, that go to economic and political matters. And what's happening in there is different from what's happening on Ukraine's borders. Having said that, I think one lesson of recent history is that once Russians are in your house, it's sometimes very difficult to get them to leave.
Murray was declared catastrophe hit on Saturday after at least 21 people froze to death in cars struck in snow amid a surplus of tourist arrival. Around 1,000 cars were struck on the hill station, while the Punjab Chief Minister issued instructions for rushing rescue work and providing aid to the stranded tourists. A catastrophe indeed. And now moving on to India, recorded on Saturday more than 140,000 new COVID cases, the largest since the end of May, as the Omicron variation of the coronavirus surpassed the Delta variant in urban areas. A total of 285 additional fatalities. The total number of infections is 35.37 million. As infections grow following the holiday season fueled by the Omicron coronavirus variety and mostly in restricted tourism, Mexico is anticipated to surpass 300,000 deaths from COVID-19 this week, making it the fifth greatest death toll in the world. During the last week, when numerous tourists from the United States and Canada visited Mexico, the number of infections more than doubled to 20,000. With cases piling up, 11 of Mexico's 32 states have opted not to start in-person school lessons this week. In a court document released on Saturday, Djokovic's lawyers said the player had been granted a temporary visa to enter the country and provided with a medical exemption from COVID vaccination by Tennis Australia because of his recent infection. Novak Djokovic relied on a weeks-old COVID infection to justify his vaccine-free travel to Australia and was given a green light by the federal government just day before the arriving in the country. And for more news about COVID-19 around the world, let's follow this report by Nabil Khazini.
In a pivotal moment for the pandemic in the United States, the U.S. Supreme Court and justices held a 4-hour meeting to discuss whether the government has the power to impose a vaccine or testing requirement on the nation's large employers. U.S. President Biden from the White House expressed his optimism to end the pandemic emergency.
The new normal doesn't have to be. We have so many more tools we're developing and continuing to develop that can contain COVID and other strains of COVID.
Some justices on the conservative-dominated court signaled support for the mandate, but conservative-leaning justices questioned whether the Occupational Safety and Health Administration had the broad authority to implement the mandate without instructions from Congress. Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte has said that people who have not taken the COVID-19 vaccine will be arrested if they flout stay-at-home orders. The Philippines has reported at least 21,000 new COVID-19 infections, raising the country's positivity rate to another all-time high of 40% out of 70,000 tests conducted. In the United Kingdom, 200 armed forces personnel are being sent to support the National Health Service in London as hospitals struggle with staff shortages. British Ministry of Defence announced that of the 200 military personnel involved, 40 are doctors who will help NHS staff look after patients. The other 160 personnel who have no medical training will check in patients, ensure stock are maintained, and would also be conducting basic checks. In order to contain the highly infectious Omicron strain of the coronavirus, Germany will implement stricter rules for the hospitality sector and shorten the period of COVID-19 quarantine, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced Friday after talks with regional leaders. Under the tighter rules, only those who have received a booster dose can have a sit-down meal at a restaurant. Those with 2 shots or have recovered must show a negative test. However, no options are available for the unvaccinated.
The 3 white men convicted of murdering Ahmed Arbari were sentenced Friday to life in prison, with the judge rejecting any chance of parole for the father and son who armed themselves and initiated the deadly pursuit of the black man in February 2020. Zara Farjani reports.
3 white men who chased and murdered 25-year-old black jogger Ahmaud Arbery in South Georgia were sentenced to life in prison, with 2 having no chance of parole. Gregory McMichael and his son Travis McMichael were sentenced for their role in chasing Arbery with their pickups in a suburban community and killing him.
As we all now know, based upon the verdict that was rendered in this court in November, Ahmaud Arbery was murdered. It's a tragedy.
The son Travis McMichael fatally shot and armed Arbery. Their neighbor, William Roddy Bryan, was sentenced to life in prison, but will be eligible for parole after serving 30 years.
We, the jury, find the defendant Travis McMichael guilty. We, the jury, find the defendant Greg McMichael guilty. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty.
During Friday's sentencing hearing, Arbery's family members called for the three killers to spend the rest of their lives behind bars as they gave emotional victim impact statements.
Not only did they lynch my son in broad daylight, but they killed him while he was doing what he loved than anything.
He never threatened them. He just wanted to be left alone. They were fully committed to their crimes. Let them be fully committed for the consequences.
Travis McMichael, who fired at Arbery 3 times at close range, was convicted of all 9 charges. Gregory McMichael was convicted of all charges except hostile murder. Bryan was convicted of 3 counts of felony murder, 1 count of aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and criminal attempt to commit a felony. The jury deliberated for about 10 hours before delivering its verdict.
President Biden traveled to Colorado on Friday to console individuals whose homes had been burned by wildfires that raged across the state, highlighting the loss as evidence of the urgent need to solve natural disasters caused by the global climate problem. The president's visit came after devastating fires raged through the suburbs between Denver and Boulder last month, fueled by high winds, dry grasses, and exceptionally dry and warm weather. Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen's visit to Myanmar, seeking to revive peace efforts after last year's military takeover, has provoked an angry backlash amongst critics who say he is legitimizing the army seizure of power. Hun Sen is the first head of government to visit Myanmar since the military takeover last February. And amid NATO rejecting Russia's security demands, Washington pledged massive consequences against Moscow if an approaching bilateral security talk fails. However, U.S. officials did not give any details about what these sanctions are going to be. Marwa Belaiwa reports.
Speaking from the Department of State, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned Russia about punitive measures if Russia engages in further aggressions, as he described.
We've talked about this, in recent weeks, and not only us, the G7, the European Union, NATO, have all made clear that there would be massive consequences for further Russian aggression against Ukraine. We've talked about financial and economic measures. Certainly, NATO's defensive posture will have to strengthen even further. Assistance to Ukraine to defend itself will continue.
The building of Russian military troops over the Ukrainian borders is going to be the key topic of next week's talks in Geneva that the two presidents, Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin, will hold. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman and Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov will lead the delegations. NATO and Russia are also set to start their own negotiations in Brussels later next week. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the military alliance will not stop its expansion across Europe, rejecting security demands of Russia.
The risk of conflict is real. Russia's aggressive actions seriously undermine the security order in Europe. We are sending a very clear message to Russia that if they once again decide to use military force against a neighbor, then there will be severe consequences, a high price to pay, economic sanctions, financial sanctions, political sanctions. And this has been conveyed by NATO allies, by the United States, by the European Union and others.
Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier said demands for the US and NATO as an effort to ease tensions over Ukraine, promising that it would limit military exercises if US and NATO agreed on its demands.
An explosion made a building fall after triggered by a gas leak, killing at least 16 in Chongqing, China's southwest. The building was contained in a canteen where 26 individuals had been evacuated from the scene. 16 of them had perished. The Ethiopian government has announced the release of several of the country's most prominent political detainees, including opposition leader Jawar Mohammed and key Tigray party officials.
On Friday, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed delivered a statement appealing for the national healing as Ethiopia observed Orthodox Christmas. He named many top Tigray People's Liberation Front leaders, whose forces have been fighting government forces in northern Ethiopia since November 2020, as well as key opposition figures from Oromo and Amhara ethnic groupings. It was unclear how many of those granted amnesty had been released. It was the government's most significant action since the country's deadly Tigray war reached a new chapter in late December, when Tigray forces retreated inside their region amid a military attack in Ethiopian soldiers vowed they would not push further. Both Jawar and Iskandar Nega, who were jailed in July 2020 following fatal protests over the execution of popular ethnic Oromo musician Hakalu Hundessa, were mentioned as those given amnesty by Ethiopia's state media, EBC. Iskandar, the leader of the Bandiras party, was released from a prison center on Friday evening. However, Tuli Bayis, a lawyer for Jawar of Oromo Federalist Congress Party and others, told the Associated Press news agency that they refused to leave the detention because the order to release them came late in the day.
According to one of their employees, 2 Haitian journalists were shot and then burned alive on the outskirts of the capital, Port-au-Prince. Amadi John Wesley and Wilkins Louisant had traveled to a region where competing gangs are vying for power. Since the death of President Jovenel Moïse in July, Haiti's security situation has deteriorated dramatically. And now China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has announced that a special envoy for the Horn of Africa will be appointed soon. Wang made the announcement during a visit to Kenya on Thursday as the U.S. ambassador to the Horn of Africa prepares to visit Ethiopia, which has been racked by conflict for over a year. A coup in Sudan and election standoff in Somalia have both caused setbacks in the region.
The visiting Chinese senior diplomat stated that his country will establish a special envoy to oversee the Horn of Africa peace process. Wang said his government will support the people of the Horn of Africa in attaining peace while speaking in the Kenyan coastal city of Mombasa.
In the region, we're partners for peace. On the regional situation and hotspots in Africa, we keep in regular contact. At the UN Security Council and other platforms, we will continue to communicate and coordinate closely. We will continue to play a larger role in promoting regional peace and stability.
He says the importance of an equal footing consultation and placing the region's fate firmly in the hands of its people. He urged that countries in the region hold a meeting on the Horn of Africa's peace. China will appoint a special envoy to give the necessary support for this process. He continued, in order to debate this topic in depth, reach political consensus, and coordinate efforts.
Kenya, Africa does not need lectures. Kenya, Africa needs friends willing to work with us to achieve our goals and our aspirations.
China's ambitious plan to play a role in the region politics and security includes the appointment of official envoy for a war-torn region. The statement comes as Jeffrey Feltman, the United States Special Envoy for the region, prepares to visit Ethiopia in renewed effort to settle the country's strife.
To another story now, EU bans ink and chemicals and argues that public health will be much better served with tougher restrictions on elements in ink to avoid cancer or allergies, while artists fear that their industry may fall. Marwa Bilayawar.
Tattoo artists in fears as the new pan-EU ban on thousands of chemicals used in coloring inks might affect their industry. The restrictions apply to materials that may cause cancer or other health issues and mainly affect colored ink.
Protection of the public health of the European citizens is our primary concern.
The updated EU regulations on chemicals, known as REACH, were agreed by all members of states in 2022. The ban covers 4,000 chemicals, including isopropanol alcohol, a common ingredient in tattoo inks, as they claim it causes skin allergies and could lead to cancer.
Chemicals which are contained in ink mixtures could be dangerous for public health, and for this purpose we have adopted this restriction.
The EU claims that the rules will reduce the number of adverse reactions. However, tattoo artists complain replacement inks are not easily available and might lack the vitality customers want. The tattoo industry argues that there is no firm evidence that tattoos cause cancer and fears the regulations could lead to more tattoos being given on the black market.
And also, we have not received any request or complaint that a further derogation is necessary due to the crisis.
Tattoo shops in the EU went through tough years since COVID-19 hit with restrictions and lockdowns, and they are in fears that the new crisis is hitting them even harder.
And for more world news, let's follow this report by Miriam Zian.
The United States has barred 8 Cuban government officials from entering the country, accusing them of being implicated in the repression of peaceful protesters last July. The top U.S. diplomat pointed specifically to the treatment of Cuban protesters who took the streets in July in a wave of unprecedented demonstrations against rising food prices, medicine shortages, and other socio-economic issues on the island. As the two countries pledged to enhance defense cooperation in response to new and emerging challenges, Japan and the US expressed worry over China's ongoing efforts to undermine the rules-based international order. In a virtual meeting, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Japanese Foreign Minister Yoshima Haschai, and the two countries' defense ministers discussed strengthening security ties in the face of an increasing focus on Japan's international role. 3 people have been killed in Sudan during protests against military rule in various parts of the country on Thursday, Sudanese Central Medical Committee announced. The committee said in a statement that the 3 people were killed during protests in the towns of Omdurman and Bahri. Both cities are near the capital, Khartoum, after security forces opened fire on them. This brings the total number of demonstrators killed since the beginning of the protest movements to 60 people. After an explosion in Saudi Arabia that seriously injured a French driver, authorities are examining the incident. France is considering cancelling the Dakar rally. On Tuesday, French prosecutors said that they have launched a terror investigation into the December 30th blast in Jeddah that left 61-year-old driver Philippe Boutron in need of surgery for significant leg injuries before returning to France. A delegation from the Polisario Front, led by its representative in Europe and the European Union, Oubi Boushraya Bashir, denounced Paris' foreign policy toward Western Sahara before the French National Assembly on Thursday, emphasizing that the referendum route is the only real way to end the conflict in Africa's last colony.
And finally, the new year 2022 starts with one of the biggest competitions in the African continent. 2021 Africa Cup of Nations is the 33rd edition and will be held in Cameroon. However, Algeria's national football team will be playing to defend the title of 2019. Abderrahim Kashour.
The African Cup of Nations, or as it is nicknamed, the AFCON. It will be the first major football tournament of 2022 that kicks off on Sunday. A host of Premier League and European stars will descend on Cameroon, with the host facing Burkina Faso in the opening game. First scheduled to start in June 2021. But subsequently brought forward to January last year to avoid Cameroon's rainy season. The tournament has been delayed to 2022 because of the coronavirus pandemic. For the second successive tournament, the Nations Cup will have 24 participants. That means 6 groups of 4. With the top 2 qualifying for the last 16 alongside the 4 best-ranked third-place sides. Games will be held at 1 p.m., 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. all-time GMT during the group stages, with the 2-letter kickoffs timing being used in the knockout stage from Sunday 23rd January. The ball being used is Imbro Togo, named after a multicolored final overstated outfit initially designed for royalty, but now popular throughout Cameroon. And the question should be raised before starting: who are the main contenders? It is really hard to look past holders Algeria, who are on the 34-match unbeaten run, and led by the star Riyad Mahrez. On the other hand, Sadio Mane's Senegal, Africa's top-ranked side for the past 3 years, were runners-up in 2019 and among the main challengers. Ghana and Nigeria are among the continent's most successful countries, while Cameroon, chasing their 6th Nations Cup title, will fancy their chances on home soil. Mali could be surprise package after reaching the World Cup playoffs by going unbeaten despite being stripped of home advantage. Ivory Coast, Morocco and Tunisia are among the other former champions present, and the other end of the spectrum, Comoros and the Gambia are first-time qualifiers. All in all, one can say since Samuel Eto'o take the football leadership in Cameroon's federation, people all around the African continent are hoping to see a different organization to a better forward future in the continent of gold and silver.
That's all for me, Nadia Kasmi, and the rest of the team. See you again in our 6 p.m. World News edition. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.